Hey there, before we jump into today's show, this episode is brought to you by Gladly, and I've got to tell you, they're changing the game when it comes to customer service. Now, if you tried dealing with duplicate tickets or fragmented conversations across all your channels, you'll love what Gladly does. They really bring everything all together. Think chat, email, phone, social media, everything all together in one seamless conversation that really is centered more around the customer and not just a ticket number. And what really caught my eye when I read some of the case studies on their website was just how many of the best direct-to-consumer brands, think like Allbirds and Bombas, Rockies, Third Love, there's a whole pile of them here, they're all using Gladly's platform to boost their agents' productivity. And imagine your team having a complete view of each customer's history, which means faster resolutions and happier customers who keep coming back. And I've seen the numbers. I know their clients are getting incredible ROI while building stronger customer relationships. So if you're ready to transform your operations, you should go totally check them out. They're at gladly.com, and you can join over 300 of the world's most successful brands.
You're listening to E-commerce Fastlane, the podcast show to help you build, manage, grow, and scale a successful and thriving company, powered by Shopify. Listen to real conversations with partners and subject matter experts as they share proven practical strategies, platforms, and the best Shopify apps to help you accelerate your business. The time is now for you to improve efficiencies, grow revenue, profit, and lifetime customer loyalty. Please welcome your host, startup founder, and strategic advisor, Steve Hutt.
Well, hey there, welcome back to E-commerce Fastlane. I am your host, Steve Hutt, and today I have a very interesting topic that I want to discuss. My guest is Josh Lauer. And what's interesting about what Josh knows, he has put his flag in the sand for Google Analytics and more importantly, GA4. What's interesting is I know that being inside Shopify for so many years, that there's been so many merchants that have felt a little lost when it comes to data. And part of it, and kind of Josh and I were talking about this just before recording, but what's interesting is this disparity right now between what Shopify is showing inside the admin and to what is being shown in GA4. And that freaks a lot of people out, a lot of marketers out, because they want to know, well, what is the source of truth? Like you always think Shopify is the mothership for inventory, and you think of your product catalog, and you think all of it, all your money, everything is all flowing inside that admin. And then you would think that the analytics would pair one for one directly. And the reality is, even by adding the script or your Google Tag Manager script and adding that in, and it's all available in Shopify's admin, but why don't they sync up together? And so we're going to talk a little bit about that and some of the headaches and some of the craziness that goes on, the marketing data challenges and stuff like that. And we're going to give you a solution today to kind of what solves that problem and what is the new source of truth when it comes to GA4. So hi, Josh. Welcome to E-commerce Fastlane.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. So as you know, near and dear to my heart about making sure that the data is accurate. And I love having sources of truth about things because I think it gives a marketer, the brand founder, a marketing edge, so to speak, because they feel confident in their data. And there's nothing worse than not being confident in your data from a marketing perspective. And so can you talk a little about some of the challenges or some of the struggles that you have seen with Shopify merchants that are struggling right now with GA4 or just don't feel confident in the data, or how do you extract kind of accurate, meaningful insights out of it? So I'll kind of pass the baton to you because you have a lot of experience here.
Yeah. So, a variety of different things are arising. Quite often when I get brought in, there is something that is double tracking, or we're not sure if the credit is being assigned to the right traffic source. And, there's just not confidence in the GA4 data when compared to the Shopify data. And then to kind of sort of tip that on its head a little bit, GA4 is still pretty new. A lot of people were used to what they were seeing in the old version of Google Analytics, Universal Analytics, or GA3, if you want to call it that. And so you've got where we're used to a tool that kind of got killed by Google, and now we've got a new one And it's actually a lot more customizable than the old one was. And then on top of that, you've got what's going on in Shopify, which is definitely seen as a source of truth because the transactions and all the orders are actually happening in there. So if things aren't lining up, there's certainly a lot of concern and anxiety that can come from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing that comes on my radar too, is that, okay, if there are these problems, then is there a solution to normalizing it and or just changing your mindset around, well, what should be the source of truth? Because it seems like a lot of marketers, they have a lot of different tools in their toolbox than an email marketing platform, and they use that as a source of truth, but they're still kind of trying to reference some of the sales data, for SMS and for email. But then there's also there's the inventory people, like how it connects to their warehouse. And you think about the forecasting, once again, pulling data from Shopify, trying to figure all that out, but separate systems running. So what are you seeing about how do you normalize the data so you feel confident in the data? Because I know Shopify has a starting point, but then how do you fit into this mix, and how are you able to assist brands with the mindset of okay, Shopify is great. However, if you want, after looking at the account, maybe looking in GA4 is your new source of truth, and kind of that's where you pull data from moving forward, maybe not from Shopify directed tools, but direct from GA4. So I just want to understand your mindset around that.
Yeah, so certainly GA4, I think, does a really good job at telling us where the traffic's coming from. It has a data-driven attribution algorithm, which, to contrast that with what you see in Shopify, if you do use the traffic source reports, those tend to be the traffic sources when the transaction happened, right? So where Google Analytics was previously a last non-direct click sort of thing. And they had, different algorithms you could use, first click attribution, time decay, all sorts of things. And that all kind of morphed into what we now have as data-driven channel attribution. And so that's kind of, one aspect. Another aspect is the landing page reports, where did they first come to when they landed on the site? And then how does that page do at actually, driving transactions and people buying? In my experience with GA4 being sort of different from GA3 and with Shopify being sort of confusing and all these different things going on, I've brought the data into a data warehouse, usually in Google Cloud Platform, because it plays nice with GA4. And then I use a tool like Stitch Data to get Shopify data into BigQuery. That allows us to look at the individual tables that power a lot of the Shopify reports and kind of see what the raw data is there. I can write queries, talk to my clients and say, hey, this is what this query is providing. How does that compare to what you're seeing in Shopify? How does that compare to what you've done in Excel or wherever you're keeping track of things? And, whether it's inventory, cost data. That's a recent one where I found a company had not been super diligent about cost data in Shopify. So if you go historically back and try to understand what the margins were, you end up with this is not quite accurate because we didn't have it for these products or those products. So, being able to understand the baseline of how does a business consider all these things, what kind of things do they feel like they haven't trusted when they're looking at Shopify, and how do they calculate that today, however manually that might be. And then can we make a query that sort of represents that in a data warehouse? And I kind of bring that all together in Looker Data Studio. So we have data that could be coming from GA4, Shopify, various ad platforms, and kind of whatever else you're using.
I see. And so my question then, based on that, so what you're saying is that the Google's kind of data cloud is, along with stick data pulling in from Shopify, and then Looker is more like the visual component and being able to query that data. And so that part I get, and a lot of those tools are reasonably affordable depending on how large your data set is. And so might be a little more complex for some people, but I think that's where you kind of fit into the mix, is where, you're able to teach that, set this all up, and then you're able to kind of consult on that. What about people in their early stages of their journey right now, where they, once again, don't feel confident yet about or didn't realize that they weren't confident about the fact that there is a difference between Shopify and what GA4 is showing. Are there any kind of like entry-level tools or things that people can connect? And can we talk about any tools that are easy to add, and then all of a sudden, okay, now GA4 could be the source of truth for an early stage brand that's just trying to get product market fit?
Yeah, I've used Elevar in the past to get basically server-side data over to GA4. So basically, it's listening to a webhook from Shopify and basically sending every single transaction to GA4 along with all the necessary details around the products and the totals and all those things. They've got a pretty streamlined onboarding solution with I think a one-time payment. I won't say prices because I don't know if those have changed, but basically you can get set up with them and they can get access to your Google Tag Manager account and push all the things live and then kind of make sure things are good. And then you're sort of off to the races, at least in terms of having reliable transaction data going to GA4. Another thing I've used in the past is Supermetrics. And this is more of a tool for maybe you've got a variety of different data sources and you're trying to pull them all together. And sort of the entry level version of that is you can have data placed into like Google Sheets, right? So like if you're thinking about your, a marketing person on a small team in a very early Shopify site, and you're trying to do your monthly reports and you're kind of pulling all these things from all over the place at the end of the month, Supermetrics can help kind of pull all that stuff into a spreadsheet where you might then be able to focus on the insights instead of the actual manual pulling of the data.
Oh, I see. Okay. I love Elevar. I've had them on the show multiple times. And so I think it's Brad was the original founder there. Mm-hmm. What's interesting, and then the other, there's actually a couple of tools and they've been on my show too. A Little Data is another one that is, server side kind of tracking and like fully kind of automatic and no code kind of thing that, I think they even go through checkout extensibility too. So they're really tight in the Shopify ecosystem from at least normalizing the data and having GA as a source of truth. And then another one, which is a little bit more outside of this kind of conversation, but is Triple Whale, where they more consolidate metrics from a lot of different tools. So they'll pull in Shopify, they'll pull in GA4, they'll pull in maybe your advertising metrics and stuff from TikTok and Meta and Google and whatnot, and then have some insights about forecasting and ad performance and some recommendation engines. So I think there is some options out there. And Supermetrics is one that's not been on my radar, so I probably had them on the show, I think, because that's a good call out.
Yeah, Supermetrics, Triple Whale is one that's actually very recently on my radar, going through an evaluation process with an account for them, and it's a pretty cool looking tool. Also, Funnel.io is another one that's more kind of similar to Supermetrics, slightly different pricing policy there, so depending on what you're doing.
I see.
But yeah, and then also Decile is another one. When you said Triple Whale, that popped into my head.
Mm-hmm. I've had her on the show too in there. Wow, this is great. Okay, so then here's another challenge that's come up in my book of merchants when I was at Shopify was subscription companies. And it's a notorious problem. And I think you obviously solve that by, number one, if potentially with these server-side tracking things, but it's interesting that you have the option now through Google's Cloud and then Looker Data Studio that you're able to query the data correctly and understand subscription. Because the uniqueness of subscription data, if you leave GA4 or the original GA3 to as is, just the regular universal analytics, every time a transaction happens, it doesn't really tag or associate who the actual customer is. Yeah, there's an order number and the details, but there's a lot of other underlying data that goes along with that transaction. It's interesting that I know there are tools that can kind of correctly stitch together every transaction saying, is there a previous transaction? Because the problem is though, if you just look at just the raw data, the subscription side of it, you don't really have the best metrics. You don't really understand LTV or how do I market to, how do I segment my data and saying, okay, well, I want to sell them a second product now and they've bought this one already. And how do I know that? And I think this is where there's some kind of disparity sometimes with GA4. So has this come across your radar at all? Have you offered any solutions to subscription companies at all?
So interestingly enough, I've worked with some subscription companies, not typically ones that are on Shopify. But that being said, I do have some accounts that are more focused on, the traditional B2C kind of checkout experience that have been interested in more granular data about repeat purchases. And what's happened there is within the orders, using the identifiers that we have in BigQuery, I'm able to essentially do like a partition by row over the orders alongside the identifier, right? So that allows us to figure out when their first order was, when their second order was. And so I would do something probably similar to that for a SaaS kind of solution.
Right. So then I guess my next other question too is around this, once again, back to data again. It's like, what's your thought around personalization? Because once again, people are coming to the website. Are there ways to push back like any kind of data that's in GA4? Is that useful data as it relates to someone kind of revisiting the website or any kind of live interactions on the website? Because I mean, I know AI is getting involved now, and there's lots, and I've seen some different tools and things that are trying to help with upsells and cross sells and post-purchase experiences, and even on-page kind of recommendations of like, certain kind of widgets. And you're looking at this, and they understand clicks and views, and they're really trying to, almost like they're stalking every single person, either known or unknown. What's your thought around data, GA, and then this whole personalization problem that people are trying to solve?
Yeah, well, certainly within GA, you can build a bunch of audiences, which you could then use to retarget in a variety of different ad platforms, serve them up an ad experience that's relevant to whatever criteria you established when you made the audience, right? Maybe they purchased a certain category and you've got like something you'd like to sell them that maybe complements that or something. Outside of that, within the actual website itself, I think we're in an interesting place where, like people are super excited about ChatGPT and all sorts of AI that seems to be conversational and sometimes smarter than we are. And yet website tech doesn't feel like it's quite there. We're still on the like, if you think the Amazon things, right? Customers also bought or similar, things like that. And so there's a variety of tools that do the sort of recommendation thing, or maybe they complete the look if you're talking about, clothing. And these things are all kind of, there's a variety of different things I've seen, whether or not we're loading up product catalogs that have full attributes with all the details about all the clothes. And then you've got the person's profile where you can kind of figure out like, what have they purchased in the past? Do they have an affinity for a certain brand and various things? Yet we have this privacy thing that's kind of going on at the same time, right? So like everyone wants personalization. They want this data. They want to be tracked to an extent because they want the recommendations to be good, but yet they also don't want to be tracked because they feel like it's creepy. And so we're kind of in a unique place. And one of the things I've seen some companies do is with the data they have, they're starting to create personas. So it's almost like we're coming back to sort of personas were around, then personalization became a thing. And then now we're going back to personas a little bit as far as what I've seen. And I think it actually makes a lot of sense. If you've got like some kind of k-means clustering algorithm that's grouping your customers into 5 different groups, and you can figure out the various attributes associated with them, age ranges, lifestyle, the various things that bring them to your website throughout the day, you can then craft a narrative that fits with those things and resonates with them on an emotional level. I think at the end of the day, people are still people and AI is not, right? While it might be quite impressive, and certainly ChatGPT is definitely able to come up with very emotional sales kind of, content that is quite impressive, where you might not know that was an AI that wrote that, but there's something about people that's inherently, real. And I think that's something that we need to remind ourselves about, that like at the end of the day, all these businesses and all these things that we're selling and doing are because we're people trying to enhance each other's lives and trying to make things better for each other.
100%. Actually, and you hit the nail on the head too about about like just segmenting and then this is a big challenge I think that brands have because they understand just with, rising ad costs and stuff, they know that retention marketing really is the key to, long-term kind of sustainable growth of a business, which has kind of opened up a whole nother market around this RFM, this recency frequency kind of monetization kind of framework of understanding your loyal or your at-risk or your churned customers, and then where do they fit? And I think in every business has their own kind of groupings of customers that are like, the biggest spenders, the ones that are the most loyal. There's the ones that are kind of at this, what I call this at-risk category, where all of a sudden they haven't made a second or third purchase, but most people that have made a second or third purchase have made it by now based on their data. And like, it's so interesting that RFM could really help and then segment. It sounds like you have that same kind of opportunity using BigQuery and then getting this good quality data in and then saying, okay, well, how do we slice and dice that data to understand where they are in their customer journey and what is the campaign you're trying to do? Well, I could say, well, the campaign is they bought a pair of sneakers and then I want them to buy these no CM socks to go with it, but they didn't buy it originally. So how do we market to them directly? And then what's the timeline? Like actually looking at the data and going, okay, well, people that bought these sneakers, that statistically they have bought this is their second purchase. But I have a whole group of people that have not done that yet. And so how do I market to them? And that's kind of back to this whole kind of one-on-one kind of marketing opportunity where that's where I think like as a consumer, you feel like the brand really gets to know you. You said, hey, it's okay to share some data because you want that personalization. The brand really wants to have that personalization happening because they want to be able to market directly to people what appears to be at scale, but it's one-on-one. And like, I bought these sneakers. These are great socks or whatever. I mean, who knows what the product is, or it's time to, to flip to a subscription option. And knowing that they've, bought some supplement or protein powder, and now all of a sudden they're not on the plan. How do we get them on the plan? And how do we know statistically when it's time to reach out to them, right?
Yeah, I've seen a variety of tools that can actually calculate that lapse point by looking at various past customers, how many transactions, time between transactions. And so let's say that part's been solved and the lapse point's coming up, right? That's where you could use a tool like Klaviyo or something to start to build out an automation flow that is specifically designed to just basically put someone in and wait till, let's say, I don't know, a week or so before that lapse point comes up. If they haven't made a purchase at that point, now we can send them a message, and what is the message? And maybe we're already doing that because they're in the email list and we're sending them regular campaigns. But to your point about the shoes, if we want to push the socks, like, would you rather get an email that like basically is like, check out these no CM socks, and it seems like, that's strangely relevant. Or is it like to a different angle? Like, do you identify like, oh, like you had the shoes and we wanted to sort of send you various ideas for how to pair the shoes with various outfits. And, particularly these shoes may do better or look better with socks that aren't showing for whatever reason, depending on the design of the shoes. And so you're kind of showing off not just the no CM socks, but maybe a few different looks with those shoes that might give people maybe, some of them are interested in the socks. Some of them aren't. Maybe they're interested in, some pants that might go well with the shoes. So like, then you can kind of expose them to a few different things. And if you can kind of, add in like user generated content to those emails where then they see other people kind of wearing the shoes, kind of, having that look that they were looking for. Now all of a sudden they're kind of like, it's not just an email that's like, check out these socks.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Now, what about still on the data idea, maybe not directly into GA4, but I will come back to that in a second. I'm thinking also about the anonymous website visitors, with an opt-in rate, let's say on a high point, maybe a 5% opt-in rate on some kind of an email or SMS in exchange for some kind of a coupon. of some sort. So let's just call that on a high point, 5% of your traffic going to convert to that, and then 2% conversion rate net. Let's just call it that. But so that still leaves 95 and 98% of these unknown site visitors that poof are just gone into the ether. Now, you obviously have pixels that are firing, and yes, you can retarget that traffic. Google and Meta know, and TikTok, they know who they are. They're not telling the brand who it is, but they're willing to take your money so you can market against them and see if you can kind of bring them back. And so that's fine. Retargeting campaigns are successful and they work. But what about like this identity resolution tools that are out there? I'm thinking like OpenSend, or I'm thinking retention.com, or there's a few others out there, like at least in America, where we have this kind of opt-out legislation when it comes to email, meaning you can email anybody in the USA as long as you have a legal opt-out. You can in Canada and you can't in Europe. But in America, you have that option if someone could show up. And I've seen this. My wife even went to a website recently, and then all of a sudden we didn't opt into anything, which is, hey, thanks for visiting. We really appreciate that. And oh, by the way, here's our brand story. And so I just want your comment on that, just because you're a data guy. Like, is that a reasonable like service to have from these, if you've heard of these OpenSend or retention people and kind of what they're doing with, I guess there's this identity graph and they're somehow unhashing it, figuring out who and they're seeing this click data around the web and saying, oh no, that's a real person. We know who they are. And then they're giving that email address to the brand, which then pipes over to Klaviyo. And apparently Klaviyo's okay with it too, from what I understand, because they're just building the email list and it's legally compliant in the US. But I just want your feedback if you've heard much about this or kind of in your data travels.
Yeah, I've definitely seen it. And also my girlfriend who lives with me has received emails and things from companies that I work for.
Oh.
So it's kind of funny, like, yeah, I'm testing all these things out and then IPs are being matched and then it hits home there. And I think like, it's sort of one of those things where like, it feels weird if someone knows who you are when you don't want them to know who you are. On the flip side, if you're in a B2B space, I feel like it's more okay because we're, trying to sell to other businesses. And then it's sort of almost more impressive in a way. But when it's more personal, I think you need to tread lightly with that kind of stuff. Now, let's say you got them into Klaviyo through whatever tools, like figuring that stuff out. You could then use Klaviyo's connections to push them into third-party app platforms where you could serve an ad, which is a little bit, less like
that's true.
Aggressive, compared to like
no SMS, no email, but pipe that data over to Meta and Google or TikTok and then do a retargeting based on them. But wouldn't that be the same as kind of what's been happening just on the regular kind of anonymous pixel?
To an extent, yeah, I suppose they'd still be sort of anonymous. But I think that's also like, well, we know who you are, so we're adding you to that group.
Yeah.
So you're not as anonymous.
Yeah.
And so, that's where it feels like, I think with any data, it's like that kind of Spider-Man sort of thing, like with great power comes great responsibility. And I think people want to feel like their data is safe and secure and not like it's just leaking all over the place.
Right.
So, if you're using a solution like that where you're getting like information about people, maybe you can try to treat it more like we're going to try to learn more from this and see how we can slowly string it along versus like kind of getting in your face. And I think the in your face thing is sort of powered by like the goals and the growth at all possible costs. And like, we need to do this and we need to do that. But I think the other side of it, yes, we live in an opt-out kind of place here. That doesn't mean that people won't mark you as spam or report your email, and so you've got to also think about the sender reputation. And I think if you're a brand that really cares about that relationship with the customer, you want to seem like a friendly, happy place for them and not like some kind of spy agency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think people have changed I think they use this, from what I've seen, they use the same drip sequence of the, thanks for signing up, when you initially sign up and get some kind of a, involved in the VIP community of some sort for their brand. So that's more the welcome sequence, which is pretty standard and like 2 or 3 emails and then back, try to convert them, tell the brand story, sales, promotions, this, that, sign up to the affiliate or the VIP program, whatever, and then move them into the general list for just, nonstop marketing, and then keep enriching that data as needed. But I also think that there's ways, and I've seen brands that have done really well where they segment just instead of now they're known to them, opted in. So they kind of change the language a bit, and it's more like thanks for visiting. And I hear say it's a little bit creepy and stuff, but they make it like the opt out very bold and simple. And clearly there's been I guess I'm not trying to pitch any of these kind of tools, but clearly that if you're on a website and you're looking for a pair of sneakers, and let's say on Carrie Yuma or something, like it's a big D2C brand, or even Allbirds, whatever, you go there, you're looking and you haven't opted in yet, or you don't really know, you don't think they know who you are. You don't even, I guess as a site visitor, you don't really think about it, but then you get this message, hey, thanks for visiting Allbirds. Oh, and by the way, here's our Allbirds story or our Carrie Yuma story. And then you get to kind of hear the brand story a bit, and you say, oh, wow, this is really creepy. Okay, well, spam. Okay, that could happen. But then the flip side, that could be easily opted out. But it's almost like, yeah, I don't know. I guess there's different trains of thought about like what a brand actually, how they're trying to portray themselves into the market. And I think if it's a soft sell of just thanks for visiting, and like, maybe you did opt in and you just forgot. Who knows? I don't know. And I think some people, I think that's kind of the reality. But I have seen the numbers on the other side where there's a really high ROI, because I think the cost factor of getting a tool like this that reveals these email addresses or 5 cents or 10 cents an email, it gets ridiculously low. And then just at scale, it has a huge ROI, right? So,
yeah, I mean, I'm certainly, that's kind of the other side of it, right? But it's sort of like you miss the shots that you don't take to an extent. So I think that's where people want to go there. And I think that it's just something to be cognizant of when you're using that, like the creep factor, right? And then think about that as you're kind of building that out. Like, would this creep me out, or would I be okay with it? And like, if it would creep me out, and I think too, also try to be honest with yourself in terms of like, well, the costs, per acquisition here seem like they're pretty low. I've got this goal this quarter that I need to hit, and it seems like if I just turn this thing on, it's going to get us there. What are the long-term effects of that? Does that ultimately become a new way into your brand that creates customers that last longer and purchase more and have higher LTV? Or is it going to be more likely that they're one and done? Can you follow that all the way through to returns? Like, do we see higher return rates coming from these people? What other kind of network things can you discover about them, as far as like, do they follow any specific influencers that are aligned with your brand, and does that make sense? What kind of partnerships or like tangential relationships can you establish that make that less creepy?
I think that's where, kind of full circle, where you kind of fit into the mix, because I could think about it if somebody, was to use, tools like this, and then there can be this data available in BigQuery, then all of a sudden you say, well, okay, I received these email addresses from this external tool, did my welcome sequence, they eventually purchased or didn't, or they opted out or whatever. And I think, through tags and other different ways, then that data can be sliced and diced. And you're right, then you can really, like, long term, you can really kind of understand the true customer journey based on the original inception of the account, and going, okay, is the LTV better on these sorts of accounts, or is it worse, or is it, as you said, one and done potentially, or yeah. And I think there's a lot of different scenarios, and I think and I think that's where you fit in, because you're a big proponent of having like a data warehouse, a source of truth that is, bringing these data points in and then being able to query against them and then display them through Looker. I think that's interesting for a marketer, and it's interesting that that's your skill set. You're there to help businesses either set it all up and do the education, or on an ongoing basis. So I think it's quite interesting.
Yeah, and it's certainly kind of wild. I think, with access to the data and sort of being in a consultant role, like there's times where it's like, okay, we've got this data and this is what we're doing with it. And it's like, oh, okay, that's what we're doing. Okay.
Yeah.
And that ultimately isn't, necessarily up to me what happens with it. And one example of like a thing that I would like to see more marketing teams try, which I don't think you see it that often, is like there's a lot of focus on automation sequences, right? And so we're like, okay, so they came here, they did this, but they didn't do this, so we're gonna put them down this like sequence. And the criteria may or may not be something that happens a lot, right? So like you're just kind of imagining like, well, what path could they go to like fall out, basically? And then you're like, well, if people do this, we're gonna catch them here with this net and try to get them back in, and sort of abandoned cart sequences are a good example of a more standardized, or a browse abandonment is sort of a level up. But sometimes you have an idea of what people might do and they don't really actually do it. So now you've gone to all this trouble of making an automation sequence that isn't really, driving much activity. And then on the flip side, most email campaigns have, or email programs have email campaigns going out pretty regularly. And those are going out to like usually a much larger segment, as opposed to just the people that match the criteria for the automation sequence. And so if you have all this data you're collecting and you have this big campaign email, what if you chose to use variables about your customers to display a different message that might resonate with them more? So you've got the main message and you've maybe got 5 different sort of topics that you've determined based off of, say, your persona groups that would be relevant. And if we don't know which one you're in, we'll just give you sort of the default message. But now you can make it so the hero of your email is actually slightly different depending on who your customer is. And if we don't know enough about them, they'll get sort of the standard brand message. And that's an interesting kind of approach that I think is maybe a little bit more confusing when you're trying to think of how would you dynamically change an email based off of things like that. But it's something where the email still goes out to a potentially larger group.
I see.
And why does a larger group matter? So if we talk about like a automation sequence and we say at any given point, we've got 100 people here in this sequence ready to get this drip campaign. And we've got an open rate of 16%, right? So now we've got 16 people that open the email. And if it's a click-through rate of 3%, you've got a half of a click for that group of 100, right?
Yeah.
Whereas on the flip side, if you have an email campaign, maybe a modest one that's pretty well targeted and it's only going to 10,000 people, and we still have that 16% open rate with a 3% click, we've got now 48 people that are going to end up on the website with a chance to buy. And even that number, 10,000 right there, I use that one because it's on the small side. I tend to recommend from an email perspective, if you're looking at a segment that's smaller than 10,000, unless every email account's different, right? And this all gets into like the reputation stuff too. If you've got a really strong reputation, your emails are going to be getting probably better overall responses and stuff like that. But 10,000 is sort of that minimum of like, if we're not sending to 10,000 people, it might not be worth the time it takes to put the email together.
Mm. So I wrote a bunch of notes here as you were speaking. And so it seems that like you're a very, I want to use the right word, but you have a lot of skills. You're multidimensional in a lot of things that you understand, because, one thing we talked about, I wrote here is like data hygiene, where I think you're very clear in understanding the sources and the accuracy of data and be choosing the CDP route. I think that's one of your superpowers and your strengths. So I would call like having good data hygiene and some confidence in that. I think that's great. I also think that you clearly have a lot of like marketing skills now too, because now you yourself or the people that you're aligning yourself with who are hiring you, then now marketers feel confident that they can actually action this data from a marketing perspective, however that looks. And I think so that gives you another interesting edge from a consultant perspective, that you have data hygiene and then marketing skills. And I think all of that like combined together with understanding the tools and the Shopify kind of direct to consumer space, that gives you like an advantage to the market for those that are looking for someone who says, hey, I don't feel very confident kind of where I'm at today, but if someone holistically kind of understands and is a business operator or what an operator should be, then you have a lot of the skill sets I think that could help a business. And so I just wanted to throw that out there, that I appreciate kind of like the flag in the sand you put, because that there's very few people that have both the data background and then the marketing background, or at least know how to give the data to the marketer correctly in an accurate format.
Yeah, and thanks for noticing that. I like to say what I do is marketing intelligence. And you think a lot of companies have business intelligence departments, and there are people that are kind of combing through data warehouses. And it's sort of this question of why is the data limited to the business team? Well, it's really limited to the people that know how to actually wrangle the data. But with marketing intelligence, it's now like, oh, we have a data warehouse that's for marketing. And I think if you look 10, 15 years ago, data warehouses are popping up in popularity. And it's like, you're going to have like one data warehouse and it's going to have like probably everything in it, more things than it needs to have in it. And there's people that are sort of policing that and how it's managed and stuff. I think today it's, quite simple to connect GA4 to BigQuery. And now you've got a data warehouse basically. And obviously there's a little more to it than that in terms of learning how to query the data and stuff. But having that, like don't fear the data, don't fear the data warehouse. And it's totally fine if there's multiple places where there is a data warehouse, even within a single company. And the kind of data that you want to house for a marketing team is probably totally different than the kind of data you want to house for a BI team. And I guess one example of that would be marketing teams are looking for reports about like the demand that they generate, and so that's the Google Analytics data. How many transactions came in, where did they come from, what campaigns were driving them, what's the average order value. But what you don't typically see within Google Analytics, because it's more complicated to set up and people just don't really deal with it, is the returns and how much of that revenue that came in is getting returned and across what channels. And so, that's where, and then if you're getting into like the financial reporting of it, they want to report on when things were actually shipped and stuff like that. So there's all these sort of different ways that the data is sort of pivoted depending on what team you're in, and to an extent, the context of whether or not that team needs that data.
What's interesting too is you're talking about reportings, and I think that's the thing is as a business kind of matures, they kind of lose or don't see value in the kind of built-in Shopify analytics reports because they, just for a lot of reasons. Part of it, and what I talked at the beginning of the show about the disparity between the data points and the percentage. I average upwards of 15 to 20% kind of a differential, and I've had lots of calls internally with brands, and they're frustrated as why is that happening? It doesn't make any sense to us, and trying to get to the bottom of that. So there is the baked in. And I think that's what a lot of early stage brands are using. I think as brands mature, they go up into other tools. I think there are other kind of third party reporting tools that will connect, similar to like what you're referring to with BigQuery and whatnot. But there's things like Report Pundit, I think is one, or Report Toaster. And there's been, I don't know, there's a few relatives out there that actually connect as an independent piece of software, and all the data points, both it could be inventory, it can be your ad platforms, it can be Shopify, it can be GA, and it all comes in together. And then they create, so that's kind of the next stage, I think, outside of the generic reports. And then I think where you kind of fit in brands that have product market fit and they're a little bit more further along, maybe they're moving into Shopify Plus, or they're on Plus, so they're in the mid-market or enterprise side. I can see the value of you being part of that mix, even for a short stint or on an ongoing basis. So can you talk a bit about, like, I'm just saying where I think you fit, because I see Shopify, then moving our way up into some little more advanced kind of reporting tools that are kind of a DIY opportunity, but better than Shopify does. And then the next step would be to kind of go into a CDP like you're talking about. So I just want to make sure you can kind of share kind of your expertise in that area. And then for those listening, we'll talk about some next steps.
Yeah. So, I mean, once you've got the data kind of in like a solution like BigQuery and you're pulling it into Looker, you've got kind of the sky's the limit. Whereas before it's like, oh, we have to report on this number this way because the tool gives it to us like this and we can't really unpack it. You get that ability to ask that question and kind of really dig in and say, is that really how that should be? Or like, do we have a lot of companies do things for various reasons based off of whatever their business dictates. And that reason and that logic may or may not line up with how Shopify or whatever tool thinks that things should be, or how they should work, right? So like the real advantage of getting the stuff out of there is you can say, this is how we do it, this is how we calculate it, and we're gonna basically continue down this path of looking at it like this. If one day we open Shopify and all of a sudden the data's completely aligned, like, awesome. But that day hasn't happened yet. So, and it's kind of interesting because people are focused on the day-to-day, the things that they have to do, the meetings that they have to go to, the strategies they need to discuss. And when they open up the data and something doesn't look right, it can be incredibly sort of disruptive, right? You're suddenly, everything made sense and now it doesn't, so to be able to open up the hood, so to speak, and kind of see what's going on under there and make more sense of it and kind of address the issue for why this was off. And here's how we're going to correct it, or we're going to analyze it like this, or we're going to count it like that. That really kind of gives you that next level of power over the data and ability to then feel much more confident in the decisions you're making as you're going forward.
Yeah, it's amazing. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make sure in the show notes, I know we've kind of talked about a lot of different tools. Like I said, the nice thing about this show is there's a lot of different maturities and complexities of people that are listening. But everybody's in a different kind of entrepreneurial flow, kind of where they're at in their journey, right? Some of the people in the early stage or mid-market or enterprise. And so there's lots of different people listening today. I just want to make sure that we had value. So I'll make sure that if you're in your early stage, I'll have some links in the show notes for maybe, the Elevars and little datas of the world and normalize your data, these server-side tracking things. There are some really good, I've had many of these different vendors on my show and kind of the problems they're solving for the early stage people. But I think the big benefit with you is, like you said, making the CDP, making this data warehouse set up, and then learning and being able to query it and feeling confident in all the data. And I think that is the ultimate system as you really want to kind of, I guess, almost create your competitive moat, so to speak, by having accurate data, and then being able to query it, whatever departments that need to query it. And that's part of what you do. So what do you think kind of next steps should be for those people that like the problems that you're solving and they've kind of like gone along with the Shopify reporting and they're okay with the differential, and they've gone into other reporting, but now they see based on this conversation that there's value in creating a CDP and there's value in understanding about BigQuery and Looker and these sorts of things. What's kind of the next steps for those listening today?
Yeah, so certainly I think you know who you are. If you've been listening, you're like, these are the problems, these are the things I need to solve.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, you can find me on LinkedIn. Just look for Josh Lauer. I've got a profile picture that I think is about 15 years old. Looks like I'm at a wedding.
You got some long hair there.
Yeah, hair's still long. But, so I haven't updated the photo. But send me a message with the words deep dive audit, and I'll get in touch with the calendar link to have a chat with you and see how we can solve your problems.
Okay. Lovely. That'll be in the show notes. So yeah, it's at our Joshua Lauer, Lauer. I'll put that link in the show notes too, just so you have direct access to that and DM him there. And then this has been eye-opening. Like, honestly, I feel, like I said, data and marketing guy together, I think is a very interesting skill set, and kudos to you. Thank you for being open and transparent about kind of what you do and the problems you're solving. I really appreciate that. I think it's one of those things where everybody's trying to find their edge. And part of it is just finding, specialist people like yourself to help solve some very unique problems. Because I think some people that don't invest in that, then they wonder why they're muddling in the middle where, hey, you know what, for a small investment, either as a one-off consulting opportunity or as an ongoing on retainer, there's still opportunity there. And I think by having an audit first to kind of see where you fit in the problems that you're currently having, I think you're offering a good service for a free audit to take a look. And I appreciate you. And thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you. It's been great.
All right. Have yourself a great afternoon.
You too.
Well, that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank you personally for being a loyal listener of E-commerce Fastlane. It's my hope that this podcast is offering you a ton of value through growth strategies, tactics, and exclusive insider tips on the best Shopify apps and marketing platforms, all with my personal goal to help you build, manage, grow, and scale a successful and thriving company powered by Shopify. Thanks for investing some time today and listening to the show. I'm so proud and excited that you have a growth mindset and are a constant learner. I truly appreciate you and your entrepreneurial journey. Enjoy the rest of the week and keep thriving with Shopify.